Qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix not only left George Russell on pole. What really surprised everyone was the way he did it. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. From the moment 1 minute and 18.518 seconds appeared on the timesheets, the atmosphere in the paddock changed completely. It wasn't just another pole position. The difference with the rest of the grid was too big for a circuit like Albert Park. Not only did Russell outperform his direct rivals, he left his own teammate, Antonelli, almost 3 tenths behind, while the best non-Mercedes car was almost 8 tenths behind. In modern Formula One, such an advantage in qualifying is extremely rare. But the most striking thing is that the pole position was not an isolated moment of the weekend. During practice, especially in the third free session, Mercedes had already shown signs of having something very strong on their hands. Russell had set the fastest time in FP3 with a considerable lead, which began to raise questions within the paddock even before qualifying began. When Q3 arrived and Russell completed his final lap, those doubts turned into total surprise. Teams, engineers, and analysts immediately began reviewing the data because everything pointed to the Mercedes W17 not only being fast on a lap, but also showing extremely strong pace over long runs on Friday. That is precisely what started to set off alarm bells. Because if a car dominates the classification but also shows an advantage in race pace, then it is no longer just about a perfect lap by the driver, but about a very well-optimized technical package. And this is where analyses based on technical information linked to the FIA begin to appear. Because behind Russell's lap, many believe there is something more than just a perfect performance in qualifying. The FIA has just revealed data that explains why George Russell's return in Australia left the paddock in complete shock. A 1 minute and 18.518 seconds that not only gave him pole position, but also left his own teammate almost 3 tenths behind and the rest of the teams almost 8 tenths away, something practically impossible in a grid as tight as that of Formula One. But what is really generating debate is not just time. According to technical documents linked to the FIA, the Mercedes W17 could be using an optimized hybrid system that completely changes the way it deploys energy on the track. A tweak to the heart of the car that could explain why Russell seemed to be in another category during qualifying. And now the big question within the paddock is clear. Has Mercedes found a technical advantage that the rest still don't understand? After qualifying, the focus stopped being solely on Russell's time and began to focus on the Mercedes W17 itself. Because several technical analyses supported by documentation linked to the FIA began to point out a very specific point about the car, its hybrid system. At the center of it all is the M17E performance, the heart of the W17 power system. According to the technical documents analyzed, Mercedes would have very precisely optimized the balance between the thermal engine and electric power, something especially important under the current hybrid regulations. The key would be how the car deploys electrical energy during the turn. The analysis suggests that Mercedes has fine-tuned the system's mapping to release energy exactly at the moments where performance is most gained, corner exits and short accelerations. And that's crucial at Albert Park. The Australian circuit is full of areas where drivers brake hard, turn and accelerate again over very short distances. In these situations, each unit of electrical energy released at the perfect time can mark tenths off the stopwatch. In addition, important adjustments are also mentioned in the MGUK, the component responsible for recovering and deploying electrical energy. Mercedes would have worked on more efficient management of the system, along with improvements in turbocharging and thermal management, allowing a high power level to be maintained for longer without compromising reliability. This means the W17 could be using its electric power more efficiently than its rivals, something that in modern Formula One can translate directly into a lap time advantage. And here is the important point. The documents and analyses linked to the FIA do not point out any irregularities. All of these solutions would be within the technical regulations, which explains why there is no investigation into the legality of the car. But that hasn't stopped the rest of the paddock from starting to look very closely at what Mercedes has done with the W17. Because if this optimization of the hybrid system is really as effective as the data suggests, after the qualifying data was analyzed and technical details of the W17 began to circulate, the reaction within the paddock was immediate. Several teams began to study closely how Mercedes was generating such a big difference on the track, especially since Russell's advantage did not seem to come solely from a perfect lap, but from consistent performance throughout the weekend. Engineers and analysts began reviewing the available telemetry data and simulations from Friday, where Mercedes had already shown very strong race pace in long runs. That reinforced the idea that Russell's return was not an isolated case, but the result of a very solid technical package. Given the noise that began to be generated, the FIA also remained at the center of the conversation. But so far, what the technical documents and the reviews carried out indicate is that there is no evidence that the Mercedes W17 is violating the regulations. The solutions that Mercedes has implemented in its hybrid system and in engine management are within the limits allowed by technical regulations. That means that, at least for the moment, Russell's pole position and the W17's performance are considered completely legal. However, when a team shows such a clear advantage at the beginning of a new technical stage, it is normal for rivals to start asking questions. For this reason, some teams would already be analyzing Mercedes' solutions in detail, trying to understand if there is any area of the regulations that the team has interpreted better than the rest. And that is precisely the point that keeps the attention of the paddock. Because if Mercedes has really found a more efficient way to exploit the hybrid system under the current rules, then what we saw in qualifying in Australia could be just the first warning of what's to come in the championship. Behind that 1 minute and 18.518 seconds that left the rest of the grid at an unusual distance, everything points to a set of factors that Mercedes has managed to optimize better than anyone at this start of the season. After everything that has been analyzed after qualifying, there is one point that is beginning to become clear within the paddock. Russell's return could be more than a simple pole position. Because when teams review the entire weekend's data, a pattern emerges. Mercedes wasn't just fast on one lap, it also showed very strong long-run performance, something that suggests the W17 is not just optimized for qualifying, but could have a real advantage in race pace. That completely changes the reading of the result. If pole had come solely because of an aggressive engine map or a perfect lap with low fuel, the impact would be much less. But the data from Friday and Saturday indicates that the car has been competitive in all conditions. And that is precisely what is beginning to worry rivals. Because if the W17's optimized hybrid system really allows energy to be deployed more efficiently throughout the race, then Mercedes could have an advantage not only in qualifying, but also in pace management during long stints. In modern Formula One, where every tenth counts and where cars are often separated by minimal margins, an advantage like this can make the difference between fighting for the podium or dominating the entire weekend. That is why Russell's return in Australia has generated such an impact. It wasn't just an impressive pole. For many in the paddock, that lap could be the first sign that Mercedes has found an interpretation of the regulations and a technical efficiency that the rest are still trying to understand. The analysis of the data and technical information linked to the FIA suggests that the W17 has found a very effective balance between the thermal engine, the hybrid system, and energy management, something that in circuits like Albert Park can make important differences in each corner exit. And the most important thing is that, so far, there are no indications of any irregularities. The solutions Mercedes is using are considered legal within the regulations, meaning that the advantage we saw in qualifying could simply be the result of having interpreted the rules better and optimized the car more efficiently than its rivals. That's why the big question right now within the paddock is not whether Russell's return was possible. The real question is another. Have we just seen the first warning of a dominant Mercedes in this new stage of Formula One? Because if the performance of the W17 is maintained in the race and in the next races on the calendar, what happened in qualifying in Australia could be remembered as the moment when Mercedes first showed the true potential of its project for this new era. After all the technical analysis and reviewing the information related to the W17, the message that remains after the Australian Grand Prix classification is quite clear. The FIA has not pointed out any illegality in the Mercedes car. On the contrary, what the documents and technical analyses show is that the team has simply found an extremely efficient way to take advantage of the current regulations, especially with regard to hybrid system management and on-track energy deployment. That explains why Russell's return has caused such an impact. It wasn't just a quick lap. It was a demonstration of what happens when a team manages to optimize all the elements of the car at the same time: engine, electrical system, thermal management, and chassis balance. In a Formula One where differences are normally measured in hundredths, seeing a driver gain almost 8/10 over the best rival car is something that inevitably raises questions within the paddock. But for now, the position is clear. The FIA has not intervened because, according to available information, Mercedes is racing within the rules. And that leaves a conclusion that many teams are beginning to accept. Maybe Russell's return wasn't an anomaly. Perhaps it was simply the first sign that Mercedes has started this new technical stage with a real advantage over the rest of the grid, because if the W17 continues to show this level of performance in the next races. So what happened in qualifying for the Australian GP could go down in history as the moment in which Mercedes made it clear that it is once again the team to beat. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.